Before I start, can I just say some house rules here? We have toilet down there in case we need to use any of the communities. And again, we're not expecting any fire alarm. In case there's any, the step where you came from, you can go down there, and then there's one by this side. Downstairs, we have 2 other exits. So, but we're not expecting any fire alarm. In our normal tradition, we start at the dot of the time we said. I'll be introducing Patrick Okiwo, who will moderate this occasion. Patrick? Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Patrick Okiwo. I'm Principal Partner NXT Advisory. Welcome to this month's Development Discourse. And we're excited that you could join us. And we're sure that others will join, but we're sticklers for time, and we like to start on time and end on time. Permit me to invite Dr. Joe Abba to join us on stage. Joe is the country director, BAI, Nigeria. Until recently, he was the Director General at the Bureau for Public Service Reforms. Prior to all of that, he managed the Office of Public Service Reforms in the Office of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And he's also a barrister and solicitor of the Supreme Court of Nigeria and also the UK and Wales. Holds a doctorate degree. In fact, his thesis should be made recommended reading, and it's free online. And I think it's a fantastic thesis to read. Strong organizations in weak states. Just type into our thesis and you'll find it. Samunon, who was supposed to join us, is unfortunately held up. He's on his way, but we'll start. Our objectives, why are we here today? If Nigeria's public service worked as it should, we'll probably be all sitting at the poolside at Hilton drinking some, pina colada or something. But the fact is that it doesn't. And it appears also that Nigeria might be approaching the doomsday scenario if you look at everything that's happening. And for us to get back on track, we need a public service that works. And that's what we're here to explore today. What is public service reforms? It's a deliberate effort to transform government. Different scholars have defined it in different ways, but it all revolves around the same thing. Udoji in '99 said it's a systematic change designed to drive efficiency. Rafin Dadi, 2014, deliberate effort to reinvigorate a state that is near collapse. Along 2014, efforts to improve capacity of institutions. Rafin Dadi again, positions it at reconstructing administrative structures. Now, Nigeria is not new to public service reforms. In fact, we can trace it all the way back to 1934, the Hunt Commission, and our effort at doing a count of the number of these initiatives, we came up with 18. Maybe Joe has a different number, but that's what we could count. We tried to group them up, and there were some commissions between 1934 and 1953, about 4 of them. We grouped them up as the pre-establishment commissions. Between 54 and 59, which we call the pre-independence commissions, there were 2. 63 and 72, the post-independence commissions, 4 of them. 75 to 95, the military era commissions, another 4. And 99 to 2012, post-democracy committees, and another 4. Now, if all of these commissions and committees worked, again, we'd probably be by the poolside at the Hilton, but they didn't. And why didn't they work? There are a number of reasons. One of them is political will, which is what we're here to explore today. But there's also issues around maybe poor diagnosis of the problem, which could have led to weak prognoses and then the wrong solutions. Deficient institutional framework to drive these reforms. Inadequate human capital, inadequate financial resources to drive through. Excessive politicization and maybe even centralization of the reforms, although I'm sure some might also argue that that's an advantage and not a problem. A disconnect between public service reforms and other economic and political reforms in the country, and then weak accountability system. I went through this to say that we are aware of all these problems, but we really want to focus today on political will and what it means and whether that's the problem, etc. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Joe, who will make an opening remark, and then we engage in some moderated discussion before we open it up to the audience. Joe.
Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by making a provocative statement, and that is that, in my view, Nigeria has only had 2 attempts at reforms since 1935. The first attempt was the Jerome Udoji attempt in the 70s, and the second was the Obasanjo era, particularly between 2003 and 2007. And the reason why I say that is that a lot of the people a lot of the authors you've cited have taken, if you like, a process approach to reforms. My own definition is much simpler. It's simply, a reform is simply changing something from one state to a better state. That's essentially what it is. How you do it is a different matter. There are different methods of doing it. You can focus on efficiency, you can focus on decentralization, you can focus on economy. There's so many ways you can slice and dice it, but at the end of the day, is it in a better state than it was before? That for me is essentially what reform is. The best way that an unwilling reformer does reforms is by commissions and committees. That's if you don't really want to do reforms and you want to give a semblance that you're doing something, then you set up committees and commissions. And majority of those committees and commissions that you've listed have basically been restructuring efforts, not reform efforts. They've been restructuring efforts. Should the permanent secretaries leave with the president that appointed them or not? Or should they remain? Who should be paid what? Who should report to who? What cases should we have? Those have been the sorts of issues. Very rarely have you heard a reform such as, what do we need to do so that we can all go and sit in the poolside at the Hilton? If you know any such commission, please tell me, where their term of reference was, we want to be able to go and sit at the poolside at the Hilton and not worry about our public service, so go and do the job. No, it's always a commission to look at pay and remuneration, or look at structure, or it's always been one of those things. Now, Jerome Udoji in 1974, I think it was, 71, I think, looked at a number of issues, including management by objectives. So the whole idea of government being the measure of performance was what he challenged. So because by government doing, I mean, we often say we've built X kilometer of roads, we've tarred X kilometer of roads, we've built 100 schools, we've given a borehole to each local government. It's often expenditure related things that we've done. And so Udoji came up with a different model, which is what objective are you trying to achieve? And how can we measure your achievements against those objectives? And therefore, if you start with the objectives, you reconfigure the service in order to deliver that objective. And so you don't have the kind of configuration that we have now, where a public servant, a civil servant is going into the secretariat on the Monday morning unclear what they're supposed to do. Okay. So I'm sorry if I'm taking long, but this background is necessary, right? So because it also alludes to the issue of political will. So we then had, and then he said, okay, and if that's going to work, then we can't pretend that public servants are saints who don't like money, who don't like to be paid. So we're going to use a stick and carrot approach. We'll give them this hard management by objectives principle, monitor their performance, track it, and use it to determine who gets promoted and who doesn't, and who gets sacked and who doesn't. But we will complement that with a sensible review of remuneration and pay, so that people actually feel that they are being held to account, just like in the private sector, they are being held to account for results that they have to deliver. The government of the day chose the more populist one, which was just to announce a salary increase and then did nothing on the re-engineering aspects, which was actually the core of the work. So threw away the re-engineering aspect. After that, all the commissions that have come, AIDA, Shoneko, have all been these sorts of issues. Who should report to who should stay for how long, and who should do what. Then, to my mind, the next major wave of reform was in the Obasanjo years. You remember that I didn't say commission, right? So it was in the Obasanjo years between 2004 to 2007, where a lot of things that were started in 1999 were consolidated. So in 1999, we had come out of long years of military rule and needed to put in place certain foundational reforms. So military rule was a command and control structure. You do what you're told, you obey before complaining. And military rule was in conflict with holding to account and due process, which the public service exists to do. And so the military had over decades systematically weakened the ability of the public sector to hold the public to account. And so when we returned to democracy in 1999, it was important to put back in place certain foundational rules. So here's how you do public procurement. It wasn't like before when super PEMSECs just sat in their sitting rooms and awarded contracts and nobody could do anything about it. So here's how to do procurement. Here's what we're going to do in terms of corruption. So set up organizations like EFCC, ICPC, and all of that. Set up the due process unit, which then became Bureau of Public Procurement. Privatize government enterprises. Set up a monetization policy. Set up a tenure policy. Got rid of some staff in an attempt to re-engineer the service and all. So to me, this was a serious, it wasn't a committee-based effort. This was a serious effort at re-engineering the service. And that's why I would say that, to my mind, those have been the two main serious efforts at public service reforms. Perhaps it's a bit unfair on those that came after the Obasanjo era, but the difference between the Obasanjo era and the eras that followed is that although there were efforts made, there was no sense of a movement towards reform. There was no, because the Obasanjo one, there was a sense of a movement of something that will lead us to the poolside at the Hilton. There hasn't been since then. There have been sporadic efforts and attempts at tinkering around the edges. But I'm sure we can debate that into the night. So let's not focus too much on that. But the topic of today's discussion, or the main thrust of today's discussion, is the issue of political will. And incidentally, those of us that study this stuff went into government with all of the literature about the importance of political will, and came out of government with the realization that there's a need to develop a new branch of literature about when political will is not enough. And so what happened within those 4 years? And so the first question, the first thing that happens is, it doesn't matter which Nigerian you talk to about reforms, they will tell you all we need is political will. Right? They will tell you we've got all the strategies, we've got all the papers, we know what we're doing, all we're lacking is political will. Has anybody in the audience heard that before? Yes? Okay. Often?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but what then is this political will? What is it? Should I pause?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So what then is this political will that we so often talk about? And what is the difference between political will in the military administration and political will in the civilian administration, particularly in a civilian administration with a presidential form of government where there is a dispersal of power? So what exactly is political will that we say if only we had, we will be able to sit at the poolside at the Hilton? I'm sure we will interrogate that when we come to the question and answer session. But it seems to me that what we describe as political will is nebulous and intangible. So if we say, okay, what are the characteristics of this political will? Then it will be a bit like restructuring. Everybody has, I was discussing with my brother Ferdinand, 20 people will describe restructuring in 20 different ways. Just like 20 people will describe political will in 20 different ways. So assume that I wanted to, what's the tangible problem we have among many? Assume I wanted to, security, okay. Assume I wanted to reform our police force, right? Nigerian police force. Where is the political will? Is it the president saying, I want to reform the police force. I'm going to do that by appointing a new inspector general and telling him what to go and do. Is that political will? Is political will the new IG having the force of authority to actually stop the perennial announcement of there will be no more checkpoints, which every IG makes, every single IG. There will be no more checkpoints from tomorrow. Every IG makes that. So, but then for some reason the IG makes that and it doesn't happen, right? So, is it political will when the IG announces there will be no more checkpoints and any policeman that misbehaves will be fired and all of that? Is it political will when the National Assembly appropriates or doesn't appropriate funds? Is it political will when the Police Service Commission fails or refuses to discipline an erring police officer? Is it political will when, as Nigerians, when you're caught doing something wrong, people will say, kill him, kill him, kill him, crucify him. Immediately you start to do that, the same Nigerian will say, do you want to kill him? You've already suffered him enough. Let him go. And so when we talk about political will in public service reforms, what exactly do we mean? I've been in a situation where, take the proliferation of agencies and parastatals. So under the Orosoye committee reforms, part of the terms of reference was to index and catalog the number of agencies we have. So Orosoye cataloged 541 agencies. In the 2019 budget, we made provision for 1,100 agencies. One was just created last week for people in the diaspora, just for good measure, so that nobody will complain of being marginalized. But I've gone to see you had President Jonathan who said, look, we need to do something about cost of governance. We can't continue this way, right? So he set up the Orosoye committee. So you need to decide whether there was a real intention or not, because he went for a committee approach. So anyway, he set up a committee. He spent a year going around and, spent quite a bit of money, came up with a set of recommendations which they submitted in 2012. Nothing happened until 2014. So 2014, which just happened to be a year before the election. It just happened to be a year before the election. Government came out with a white paper in March. The white paper rejected something like 60% of the recommendations that the committee made, which he had every right to do. Government has a right to decide what to accept from a committee and what to reject. So anyway, let's say it accepted 40% of what was recommended. Gazetted it in a white paper. Then, no, that was 2013, not 2014, that was 2013. So then, nothing happened. Then, late in 2013, another committee was set up to implement this white paper that had been accepted by government. The first thing that committee decided was we're going to take some appeals, because a number of people appealed that Orosoye judgment was wrong, or the white paper judgment was wrong. So we get an example of where the Medical and Dental Council was classified as a voluntary association like the Nigerian Bar Association, but it wasn't actually. It's actually the regulator of the profession. So of course they complain and say we're not a professional association. We're actually a regulator, a governing council. So there were a few of the appeals that were valid and genuine, and there were some others that were not. And of course, as you can imagine, there was all sorts of lobbying from all sorts of places. I was the secretary to the committee, so if I'd been so minded, I would have made a lot of money by pretending to be able to influence what happens. So anyway, so we went through all of these appeals, and basically that's what we did until the elections of 2015. That's all we did. We went through some appeals. The argument of, okay, let us even implement the ones you've accepted and gazetted became an issue. So, end of 2014, as we were preparing for the 2015 budget, I wrote to the Secretary to Government and said, there are, 22 or 23 agencies that government has said in the white paper it will no longer fund from different years. Okay, so this one will no longer fund from 2015 2014, this one from 2015, this one from 2018, so I then listed all the agencies that government had gazetted and said they will no longer fund from 2014. Put it in a list and sent it to the Secretary to Government to say, can you please advise the Minister of Finance that this organization should not be captured in the 2015 budget? Because government has put a white paper and said he wasn't going to do it. To be fair to the SGF, he wrote to the Minister of Finance and said, yeah, this is what we said and this is what we should do. DGBPS has pointed it out and is right. Let's do it. Minister of Finance, to be fair to her, deleted those agencies from the budget. And said, so the government has said we shouldn't be funding you, so you're no longer in the budget. This was around November, December 2014. January 2015, somebody realized, government is facing elections. Because people are then realized that they didn't get paid for January, which is when this thing hit home for the first time. So people didn't get paid in January, and then it was, okay, don't pay us now, elections are coming next month, we won't vote for you. And so a political solution was found, which is, okay, government has not decided to sack anybody, so we will put back the salaries, but we won't give them overhead and we won't give them capital. So that's what happened. So people spent the whole of 2015 basically doing nothing.
And collecting salaries.
And we paid their salaries, basically. So 2015, new government came in. Of course, part of the briefing was, this is the work we're doing. Went to see the new president. Absolutely, we must do this work. I don't even want to reconstitute boards, because I don't want to put a politician in a board that I'll scrap tomorrow. They will say I did it intentionally to embarrass them. So please, you guys go and tell me which ones I'm scrapping and which ones are not. So we went, did the work. It stopped at the desk of the SGF. And so we'll go again. After like 3 months, the chief of staff will come. DG, the president is looking for you people. Where is this work? So we'll go back again. And the president will say, at least there are some that we know will not be affected. We know that the central bank won't be affected. We know that NDIC will not be merged. At least let's start with those ones. Tell me the ones that are not contentious. So we did, went back, everybody signed, the Attorney General signed, everybody signed. And then you hear, and then somebody called me, a PEMSEC friend of mine called me and said, DG, come, I want to tell you something because I like you. There are only 2 people in this government that are interested in streamlining agencies at State House. Mr. President and you. Nobody else. And I just want to tell you this so that you'll be careful with how far you push in this direction. So tell me, was there political will or not? Should I stop there?
Yes, so we can, because there's a lot to discuss, but I think we've got Sam Unon joining by Skype, just because he can't get here physically. Sam, if you can hear me, maybe you start with your opening statement, and then we go to questions. Is it what you want? Can you hear me? Maybe it doesn't have to go. We can see you, it appears your mouth is moving, but we can't. Okay. Okay, he can't hear us, so.
Maybe
It's weak, I can't hear you.
put a microphone next to the.
I think he's hearing us.
It's actually connected to the video.
Okay. Oh, is this mic on mute?
Okay, I guess technology is not our friend today.
I hear you now.
Can you hear me?
How does your voice sound to yourself?
What's his name? One.
This is where we try to.
We can't hear you. Sam, if you can hear me, we can't hear you.
No, it's still the same.
It's still kind of the same. Hello?
Oh,
Excellent. Okay, we can hear you now.
all right, yeah. Yeah, so you wanted me to give an open?
Yes, an opening statement, yes.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't quite follow what you what you was right. Yeah, the line to will public will can sometimes very low. I also have an example. There was a time that the minister has with that clear proposal.
Maybe you should just call instead of
Let the use phone.
Sam, sorry to say this, but it's not coming through quite clearly. So let's see if we can call you on the phone.
I'll try to have it.
Let's see if we can. We would love to see your things, but let's see if we can call you on the phone and see if that works better. If not, we'll just continue with Joe has to carry the weight of everything.
Okay, all right.
So they'll try to reach you on the phone.
Okay, all right.
Okay, let's explore this a bit because I think the examples you used are very apt. You know, we had a Jerome Udoji, then the Obasanjo reforms, and then the Jonathan reforms, right? Or the effort under Jonathan to drive through on those reforms. What do you think made the difference? Is it the character of the presidents at the time? Because those were two very strong personalities, and one would immediately begin to think about places like Rwanda and Singapore, similar strong characters. Or is it that the institutions at the time? So if you go back to Jerome Udoji, stronger institutions. If you go back to Obasanjo around 2003, we were beginning to lay down, roots of new democratic institutions and so on. And by the time we got to Jonathan, we had kind of figured out our ways around this institution. So where do you locate it? Is it in the character of the person, so we just start looking for strong personalities? Or is it in the strength of the institutions at the time? And if it's in the institutions, what then happened to cause it to break down between those less than 4 years, actually?
I would say the character of the leader is important. I would say the institutions are also important, but one of my key definitions of political will would be the presence of a sufficient number of people that believe in the same things. And if you look at the Obasanjo government, there was a core of 6 or 7 people who all thought the same way. They were all market-friendly, if you like, right-wing in terms of ideology, or at least center-right, if not right-wing in terms of ideology. They believed in free markets, they believed in the smaller states, they believed in taking whatever action is necessary to get things done. And so you had a core of 6 or 7 people that believed in the same thing. And so it was easier to drive. That is what is missing now.
So that coalition, that critical mass of people who are focused on.
Yes, and that's why I gave you the example. Political will of one person is insufficient, even if it is that of the president. It is not enough. Even the political will of the president is not enough. There needs to be a sufficient number of people who A, believe in something, B, sufficiently understand it. They sufficiently understand the thing that they want to do. And that's why I guess the difference with our former boss, Pius Ahim, is that he, of course, he never had time to read anything voluminous, but he had 4 or 5 people, including a couple of ministers, whom he would give things to read for him and tell him, advise him how to proceed. So you need people who sufficiently understand the topic, right? Who are in sufficient numbers to believe in the issue, who have a clear idea of what the solution might be, and have the access to power to drive through that solution. How would be my 4 components of political will?
How come we were able to pull together this coalition of people who were sufficiently focused on these reform issues, say under Obasanjo's second term, and we were not able to do it under a Jonathan administration that still had a lot of right of center type people, that still had a lot of people who you would say had a broad worldview, global worldview on how things should be done, who said the right things. How come in a space of 2-3 years we lost that momentum, that movement that seemed as if we were heading somewhere, at least in terms of reforms?
I think if you remember correctly, after the Obasanjo era came the 2.5-3 years of Yar'Adua, during which time he actually reversed a number of things, focused on due process and rule of law. Don't forget what I said earlier, that this other group were willing to, if he needed breaking eggs to get, to get an omelette, they were willing to do so. Yar'Adua's view was, no, we need to do things properly. Even if it takes us longer, we need to have it properly done. So that happened over like a 2 to 3 year period. In my view, the Jonathan government had a number of stars who did very well in their respective disciplines, right? In their respective areas, they did quite well. What I did not see is a joint collective effort to an outcome. That's what I didn't see. And that's what we had under the Obasanjo era. So under Jonathan, you have You love additional who's doing well. You love Okonjo-Iweala who's doing well. You love a few, but what we had in the past was, if you like, a reform team of senior government officials, not a committee of powerless people from outside. So we had a team of senior government officials led by Okonjo-Iweala, with El-Rufai as the foot soldier, with Soludo as economic advisor and later governor of Central Bank, with Obieze Ekwesili driving due process, with Nuhu Ribadu driving anti-corruption. And these were all people that had a similar background. And so Obasanjo was a founding member of Transparency International, where he met Obieze Ekwesili, who started the whole due process thing, and then the identification of El-Rufai, and from there to Ribadu. So these are people of a similar. It's like you and I, and Maureen and Fedi, as the foot soldiers that are driving this thing, and we knew that whenever we spoke with the authority of the president. That is what was not there.
So it still comes back again to the character or the personality of the president. To be able to, one, put together this coalition, but also to give them the powers to go out there and do what they need to do.
Yes, it is very important. But like I said, it's an important but insufficient ingredient. And so you need to have, in my view, these four elements present. The power and the will of the leader is insufficient. He needs to be able to get a sufficient number of people who are bright enough to understand the problem, who have a joint view of what the solution might be, and have the staying power and the guts to actually drive it all the way through. If any of these components are missing, in my view, there's no political will.
So there's also the discussion around how do you arrive at what this reform should be, so you build more of a much wider consensus amongst the populace. Yeah? Is there anything in our experience that showed that we tried to do this? Because I haven't found that. What we found is you have a strong president who pulls people together and they drive it through, and Nigerians follow for as long as you remain president. But once you stop being president, there's a default to where we were before. So is there a place for making concerted effort to build this consensus amongst the people, so that we ensure that the reforms you're trying to drive through has the will of the people before you then ask for the political class to bring it through?
It's a very important question, and again, if you look at the trajectory of our reforms, say from 1999, like I said, it was important to put in certain foundational rule-based reforms when we first got back to democratic rule, and that's why a lot of it was, monetization policy, tenure policy, sale of government houses, anti-corruption, things you can do and things you cannot do. That was the first phase of the reforms. The second phase, I would say, will be from 2008 to 2012, where we're beginning to look at process-type reforms. So, putting in place the Treasury single account, for instance, putting in place the pension reforms, the transparency reforms, NATI, and all of those things, signing the Freedom of Information Act. So focus more on how we do things. So the first phase of reforms, 1999 to 2007, you could say is, this is what you can do and this is what you must not do. Okay, 2008 to 12, I'll say, okay, this is how to do it better and properly. And then I'll say that from 2012 upwards, we started to focus on, okay, so what does it mean for the man or woman on the street? Because, go to an old person in my village in Ebonyi and say to them, monetization of government policy. What are you talking about? You know, their interest is, if I go to hospital tomorrow, will I see a teacher? Will I see a doctor? If my kids go to school, will they get a teacher? That's what's of interest to them. If I travel through the airport, can I come in without harassment? Can I get my passport on time? Can I get my tax clearance? If I apply for any sort of license, am I going to get it? So that has started to shift, which is what has culminated in the whole ease of doing business saga. And when people ask me what my major legacy is in government, I'll say it is helping to engineer that shift, because what I did was to go back to the Udoji management by objectives approach and say, let us start from the outcome we're looking for. If we can keep re-engineering the civil service forever, and societies that are thousands of years old are still re-engineering their civil service till tomorrow. So that part of it never ends, it never stops. And so I thought, okay, let's start with what objective do we want? What objective do we have in mind? Because if the objective is that a Nigerian should be able to apply for an international passport, get it within 7 days without needing to bribe anybody and beg anybody to do anything, that's the objective, that's what we're working to. Then the immigration service and the rest of the public service will have to adjust themselves in order to meet that objective. If you go through the input side, you will get all sorts of problems. We can't do it because we don't have power. We are not paid well enough. There's no ink. The capture machine has broken down from Abuja. And that's why I think I actually attacked the vice president today when he was saying in the news that Nigerians should stop paying bribes for passport and driver's licenses. And I said, well, VP, that's disingenuous. You know what needs to be done, and you just need to do it. Because you need to get the immigration service to commit to a service standard that says all Nigerian applications for passports will be processed within 7 days. Then you publish your performance against that target. It's straightforward stuff. Publish your performance against that target. From there, you find out which offices, and I know the offices in Lagos, where if you go, you part with money before you get your passport. So you do all of those things, and then you only show up, there's no booklet. That's an insult, right? We know on average how many passports we issue every year. How hard can it be, Patrick? How hard can it be to say, okay, we issued 1,000 passports this year, our growth rate is at 3%. Let's add 3% or 5%. I mean, how hard can it be? So I think in answer to your question, it is to flip the narrative and focus first on the outcome. If you focus on the outcome, then the bureaucracy will have to adjust itself.
So let me ask one more question, and then we'll open it up for the audience. But you don't have the ability as, say, a minister to penalize, people. What's that you gave to while at PPSR around changing the incentive system to ensure that people do what they're supposed to do, mindful that there's a penalty, that could happen, and what resistance did you come up against in trying to fix that?
Okay, so let me start with the second question, which is one of structure. So the indigenous Nigerian civil service dates back to 1954. Between 1954 and 2016, when I first made the efforts, there has never been a structure linking government objectives and priorities to mandate of ministries, to roles of departments, to the functions of units, to the individual job description, and therefore the performance targets of that individual. That spine has not been there since 1954. And so when in late 2015, the president announced the merger of some ministries, there were 6 major ministries that were affected by merger. Things like power works and housing were merged, police service, police affairs was merged with interior, information and culture were merged. There were 6 of them that were merged. So we thought, okay, this merger presents a wonderful opportunity to use this approach and try and get 6 ministries where people actually go to work on Monday knowing what their job is and how their job contributes to the objectives of the government. We spent a lot of time, if Sam is still on the line, actually Sam's organization provided a lot of support for us to do that analysis. So we did a functional review of these 6 ministries, and you can imagine how difficult it could have been to try and, a bit like mergers and acquisitions. The accountants would just sign on the dotted line and say, okay, it's been merged. They didn't realize that's when the real work actually starts. So you can imagine trying to integrate power works and housing into one coherent ministry. So it took a lot of work, actually, and we did that, produced the report, sent it to the head of service to forward to the president. That's the last we've heard of it. Okay? So, but the thing about doing good reform work is it's like the gospel. It will always be there, gnawing away at your conscience. It will always be there. So the work is there, and the day that somebody decides to do it, they will do it. It's fairly straightforward what needs to be done. The second thing, your second question is about the authority to carry forward the reforms. And let me just say that at the time that I made it known to government that I was going to move on after my first tenure, and a number of people tried to persuade me to stay. One of the things I said is that if this thing is going to work, the leadership of the reforms needs to be championed by a cabinet level person. So it needs to be somebody in cabinet, 1. 2, that function needs to reside in the State House, not anywhere else. And 3, even fellow ministers need to know that whoever is leading that reform speaks for the president. That is the only way. We had something close to that under the Obasanjo era, because El-Rufai, who was basically the lead foot soldier, is a cabinet level member. He had the support of the Minister of Finance, because you need money as well to do the reforms. He had the support of a number of friends, and was then able to go to the Federal Executive Council every Wednesday and say, this is what we need to do, and this is how far we've got. And without that, I felt that continuing to be DGB PSR under those circumstances was suboptimal.
Excellent. Let's open it up for comments, contributions from the audience, if any. Okay, who's walking the microphone?
Good evening, my name is Madejike. I want to ask a question based on the recruitment process of Nigerian civil servants. What were you able to do? Do you think this is a problem? Because as good as your reforms might be, if the people that will implement it don't have the capacity, the innate capacity, the training to do that, how did it affect the system? How is it affecting the system? How can it be improved? Secondly, I want to also ask about the ethno-religious dimensions of Nigeria. Did it affect your work? Is it affecting the system we're operating today? And if that is the case, do you think that restructuring the entire system might be an option to resolve this problem in the Nigerian civil service system? Thank you.
And I think the question, if I help you to shape it up, will be in the context of how all of this helps or deters us from delivering the political will.
Yes.
Because the challenge with these types of conversation is that there are lots of problems, right? And if we don't kind of focus it on the political will discussion, we might not get somewhere.
Yeah, the political will is important, and that is the focus we are doing today. But he mentioned a strong president. And he gave 3 indices on how we can get the political will. Strong president, the people that believe in the reforms, who have the same background and all that. And the question is, he was there at the top. The capacity of the people that implement it I'm a civil son myself. I know a lot of people now, you ask them to even cover a very serious meeting, they cannot. When they do the report, to run away from it. How did they get to that level of authority? What about the training? And also, the civil servant has not been properly trained in this country. I'm also adding training. How can you get a very functional civil service without training? ASCON is there, just lying waste. And people will tell you, wait for your turn. And everybody's keep on moving from one level to another without achieving anything. A rolling stone that gathers no much.
Excellent, thank you. I think in front of, next to him.
Thank you very much. If you look at me very well, I was in the office.
I know.
I came to disturb you. And you gave me some voluminous books.
When one of my bosses said, all you ever bring me is voluminous books, you never bring voluminous money.
You gave me some voluminous, but
I give.
Yeah, but I thank you very much for it because it's illuminated my mind a lot. And I'm happy that you're the one sent to come and deliver this issue today. I'm a bit sad that Sam, another friend of mine, is not here because I wanted to hear from him. There are 2 sides I want to look at the problem at hand. First, the issue of continuity of governance in Nigeria. It doesn't happen. If you have a regime that has a number of foot soldiers that have done tremendous, excellent work in reform, why can't the next regime take up the gauntlet from there? But everybody wants to shine and put his name as the author. If you're not the author, then you don't want to implement. I think it's a problem. And I think if you could address it, I'll be glad. The second is the raison d'etre for each reform. I have a particular one in mind. If you've been 8 years director, retired, what was the raison d'etre for that? What was the reason behind that? We saw that some elements from a particular area of the country had been directors for 15 years, 18 years, 20 years. Some older and above 60, but some you will see them in the civil service, they say they are 54. And I would look at them and say, am I older than this man? He must be my uncle, and he's still there, he says he's below 60. So what was the raison d'etre for that? Been 8 years retired. It affected some people who were genuine. They came from I was one. I came from the university. I was head of the Department of Political Science in Lagos State University. I had a good job. Then I was coming to Abuja as a consultant in the Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution. Then there was a vacancy for director. That was 2003. I applied. I got the job. I intended to retire at 60. I just want to put this down. Let me finish, please. You won't cut it because I'm going somewhere. So I intended to retire at 60. Then they said 8 years retired. So if the intention is to block out those people that were already so old on the job, it affects some other people. That's another. So those are the 2 things I want to.
Thank you. Right in front of you.
Thank you. My name is Maureen Johnson. Well, I was listening to you, Joe, and there are 2 areas I wanted to talk on, and it's actually the people will and the bureaucratic will, which I think are largely missing in many reform situations. We have very good examples of that, such as Selicom, for instance, which was for the people. I think when the people are not fully carried along and you don't build enough coalition around the interest or subject of reforms, it will fail. The next thing is about how reforms are introduced, because I did an analysis of why Selicom failed. And one of the reasons was actually bureaucratic will. And that is really why, we hear them say, okay, soldier come, soldier go. They wait for the particular appointees. When they move on, everything, things just revert back to normal. And I think that's part of what happened with the reforms that President Obasanjo introduced at his time. By the time there were a lot of reversals, monetization, government agencies are now buying cars again. The rents are being paid. Ministers get into posts. Permanent secretaries, directors are coming to tell them how they get government allocation for houses, or government, government to pay for their houses and pay for cars and things like that. So, at what point, would reforms begin to resonate with public service, so that they are the ones who really see the need for the reforms and ask for it?
Sure.
Yeah. And this also happens, you find this in MDAs mostly. MDAs like parastatal, sometimes when a new DG comes, they tell you what has been going on, and you find that those public servants in those places continue with some of those reforms when it's contained within those MDAs. But the public sector-wide reforms, they feel reforms are happening to them. Yeah. And so is it time, to change how reforms are introduced, how it's communicated, and to build more interest and the support for reforms so that they're sustained.
Excellent. Joe, can we take one more question? Yeah, I think that's.
My name is Adilu. Sir, I have two questions for you, sir. The first question is just a yes or no. Just yes. These reforms in the public service, the merger or whatever, is it designed to create more unemployment? Just a yes or no?
No.
Okay. The second one, there are certain things that terrify me in this country. And one of them is any thought of more money in the hands of my governor, for example, would just terrify me. I am from my state. I won't tell you that state. So, my second question after it, I will now come back to my state. Whenever government wants to streamline anything, save costs, cut costs, if it has to do with saving money, my problem begins from there. So, the reforms are necessary, but the monies that we want to save, we have to now, it will be redistributed in the national budget or to give it to all other tiers. Are you convinced? Are you really sure that if government should save money, and this money is given back to the governors and to the other or to the local governments, it will be used judicially? Are you really very sure?
No.
So then what's the point?
Okay. He will address it. Thank you very much. Maybe Joe address this one and then we'll take another round of
So let me start with the last one, because I think it's the easiest of the lot. A lot of people think that reforms will necessarily lead to job losses. That is actually a fallacy. Done properly, reforms will actually create more work, because you have a system that is not serving the people. And so if the system begins to serve the people, you'll actually need more hands in order to do so. So take an example now. You would have heard all sorts of stories about, we have this organization has 1 car and 6 drivers, right? Yeah. So the response of the uninformed reformer, or the reformer that looks at things only through an economics lens, would be sack the other 5, right? You don't need them. However, if your purpose is to increase the quality of services delivered to the citizens, then you may actually say, okay, anybody over the age of 70 that has an appointment at the National Hospital, we will go to their house and pick them and drop them. As a recognition that, look, you're a senior citizen, you've paid taxes to this country should give you something back, right? If you had to do that, how many drivers do you think you need? Only one? You could actually need more than even the 6 that you have. So when we talk about downsizing and sacking people, and when people say that services are bloated, you should always ask, bloated for what? Never allow people to leave it hanging, because people make those sweeping statements. The service is over-bloated. Over-bloated for what? Is it over-bloated for the current services being delivered? Maybe. Is it over-bloated for the service it should be delivering? Maybe not. And that's why you need to do the analysis, because in some cases, like I said, you may actually need more people. Our level of tax collection in Nigeria, I really don't see why the Federal Inland Revenue Service cannot employ 50,000 people in one go. Because how many people are we collecting taxes from? You understand? So you can look at FRS today and say it's bloated. But if you give them a target that is 10 times what they currently collect now, they will have to employ more people. Okay, so this is why we need to be a bit more sophisticated than people often are. You know, the press is the worst culprit. They just carry these headlines that make no sense. The issue of saving money, again, we need to think about, we have a situation where something like 2% of our population is consuming 75% of our resources. And we have to think, is it fair or not? And so when you talk about saving money, should we be paying senators 15 million naira per month as running costs? Not salary, not anything else, just running costs for which they are just supposed to tender receipts. Right? They are not supposed to tell you what they did with the money. So, should we be doing that, or should we be putting money into health, into education? So, but there are all sorts of issues which are wider than this about the revenue sharing formula between federal government and states and all that. I don't want to go into all of that, but my personal preference would be that we reduce the cost of doing government, the cost of governance, and use that money to invest more in things that affect more people, not only those who are fortunate enough to get into public office, either by appointment or by election. That's my view. The recruitment process of civil servants is important. My starting point is always that the civil service will work the day the politicians want it to work. Until then, it will not work. It's really as simple as that. Because if the politicians really want it to work, then the whole issue of secret appointments will not happen. The whole idea of treating the civil service as a nuisance that needs to be tolerated rather than as a driver of growth will not happen. So because the civil service is essentially a dumping ground, then it's not a surprise that you get the kind of quality of people you get. But there's a bigger societal problem that is only manifesting itself in the civil service. Because if your dad paid for somebody to write JAMB for you, and you got admission into university, and while you were in the university, you joined a cult, right? And you were intimidating lecturers and were using money to sort them. I know the language. We were using money to sort them, or or there was a sex for marks situation going on, and then that person manages to graduate without any capacity, and then their parent or somebody they know influences their posting for NYSC. And then because there's nothing else, they can't pass any entrance exam anywhere else, there's nowhere else to go, somebody fixes him into the civil service. Now tell me, somebody with that mindset, did they come to work?
No.
So it's something that starts as far back as the family.
Sure, but so it appears we've got, the same. How do we solve it? Because you said if the politicians decide to make it work, it'll work. Yeah. That seems like a collective action problem we have here. We know what is right, but we can't get it to work. Is there a way to muster that political will or to change this incentive system to then get us to a point where we say we want it to work? Given that we are now really at the edge of that abyss, is the situation right to then have a national conversation? Is it a national conversation, or does it go back to the 4 items you raised around, what the president and his people should bring to make, so how do we get beyond this? Because it's not going to solve itself.
I think a conversation is very, very necessary. However, my fear is that these issues are so complex that it takes a certain level of it's not about who wins. It doesn't matter who wins, this structure will remain. Right? So we need to have that conversation with each of the stakeholders. Whether it's the political parties or the unions or the civil servants themselves, the people in the villages. We need to have this conversation that says, look, we cannot continue in this way. And the reason why things have not worked is because we've carried on in exactly the same way in the last 2 to 3 decades. That's why nothing seems to work. So yes, it's important that those conditions I gave about people understanding the challenge and then understanding what the potential solutions might be, that is the beginning of the conversation. And of course, the trade-offs that need to be had. So for instance, if we have to merge a number of parastatals, why do we need to merge them? And B, what will it become when we merge them? And C, what are the pressures we'll come under by so doing? So you go through that kind of analysis for each of the key things, and that's what would actually give you a bit of a roadmap. The issue of ethno-religious dimension, I think you're asking the wrong person, because unfortunately, I lived in the UK for 15 years, and I say to people that I never experienced racism once. I'm sure I did, I just didn't notice. If anybody was being racist to me, I think he must be really stupid, and I'm sorry for him. So I don't even notice, right? So because of that, for that reason, I think the ethno-religious thing is simply an excuse for politicians to do the wrong thing. There's no ethno-religious thing. You and your neighbor live in peace. You don't care who is from where. If you are from the east, your neighbor is from the west, the other neighbor is from the north. You borrow soap from each other, you borrow salt. There's no problem. The only problem comes when there's contestation for politics, and that's when they will use that to accentuate any divide. So no, I don't think that is a major issue. And where these reforms have been driven, they've been driven regardless of ethno-religious affiliations. I mean, the Obasanjo government, like I said, had people from the north, the south, the west. There was no issue there. Continuity of government, well, there's no To be honest, there's no answer to that. There's just none. If I knew the answer, I would bottle it and sell it. But you've already answered it. You know, everybody comes and wants to make their own mark and wants to do their own thing, because again, that is what we as an electorate demand of them. So if I come in, I'm not going to go and complete anybody's project. No, I will not, because if I do, I will be voted out the next time. They will say he didn't do anything. What he did was all the projects of the other person. So our own expectations of the leaders is really the reason why there is a lack of continuity. The tenure policy issue. Not everybody came in the way that you did, right? Some people were peacefully selling tomatoes in the market, right? The governor came to do a walk around the market, and this young man could sing his praises better than anybody. And he says, you know that young man, bring him to my office. My friend, what do you do? I'm selling tomatoes. Okay. From tomorrow, you're a director in the civil service.
Terrible. So
he becomes a director in the civil service, and somebody says to him, what are you doing in Ebonyi? There's a vacancy in the federal now. So he applies to come to federal. He's 24. Okay? He comes to federal. Federal says, okay, if you're coming in as, from the state, you come in as deputy director, you drop one level down. So he comes in as deputy director. The promotion exam is asking, list all the states in Nigeria that are named after rivers. That's the promotion exam. So he passes. And, you know, there are people who are specialists at writing exam. So he's a director at the age of 27. Right? And then in my state is underrepresented. There's a vacancy. He's the only candidate for PEMSEC. He's 30.
It's terrible.
Okay. He has another 30 years.
Terrible. Before
he retires. Nobody from Ebonyi can become PEMSEC until he dies. And he's not in a hurry. Do you see the problem?
Yes.
So you then had this bottleneck at the top of the system, which meant that people were spending, very bright people were spending 35 years service, not going past chief or even assistant director. That was part of the problem. That was part of the problem for now. The issue of political will and bureaucratic will is very, very important. In fact, I call it not just bureaucratic will, I call it technical will. Because again, Maureen is very right. There are things that the political will of the politicians exists. The technical will of the technocrats is lacking. And the one thing that the technocrats do exceptionally well is to give the impression that they are complying when they are not. Correct. And so the issue comes, okay, so what do you need to do to make people believe in these reforms? And there are a number of things. The major thing that puts off a public servant is not, it's not the disrespect they get, it's not the abuse of everybody calling them thieves, it's not even the fact that they earn less than other people. It is a feeling of injustice and unfairness. Once a public servant feels injustice and unfairness, they will never support any reforms. And that injustice and unfairness is at different levels. We've mentioned the money that the legislators get, which is a source of unfairness. Then you've got the major dichotomy between what the civil service gets and what certain parastatals get. And so you get certain parastatals where the driver earns more than the director in the mainstream civil service, right? The same sector. In fact, not just the same sector, the ministry is supposed to be overseeing the agency. Then you get the feeling of unfairness that permanent secretaries have sorted themselves out. So a permanent secretary earns 3 times what a director earns and gets to keep a salary for life. right? So the PEMSEC gets his salary, full salary
For life.
for the rest of his life. Okay, so if I'm now an assistant director and I've done 30 years service and I've worked in BPSR where it's just book, no money, it's just book, right? And then I realized that 5 years to go, I don't have a house, I don't have a car. Any economic shock will send me into serious problem. Somebody dying, somebody with a major ailment. Then you shouldn't be surprised that some of my officers were coming to me to say, Oga, I really believe in what you're doing, but I need to go to a place where I can get some money.
Yes.
And build myself a house and at least buy a decent car that I can use. So until we address that issue of unfairness, you will just be preaching. It's why the National Orientation Agency doesn't work. Jingles don't work. They don't work. You need to get to the root of the issue that is affecting these people. Is that all? Okay. Do we change our reforms? That's part of it.
Okay, so let's open it up again. I see a hand at the back and we'll walk to the front.
Good evening. My name is Michael Bradley. Nice to meet you.
Finally.
I've been following our series on Twitter. So my question might not be fully public from again it's around public development. So let's say I have 2 lives. In my previous life before this now, I was in consulting for years. And during my consulting years, my active consulting, management consulting years, I've been involved in quite a lot of developing policy, developing reforms, quite a lot. And I know you have so much experience and you participated in many. In Nigeria today, do we really need a new work of reform or a new policy development, or to just go review some of what have been done and implement? Because we are talking about reforming the reformables. That's my interpretation of what we are doing today. So, do we really need new committee or new work or new TOR or new whatever it is called to look at anything, or we can just save that stress and just even implement maybe 15, even 20% of some of the, let's even take it from 1999, some of the work that have been done. What's your view around that?
Excellent.
Then the second one, sorry. So now, consulting in the development sector now. And it's a very big depression. I've shared a lot with Patrick. So what can we do? Because what we can do is around policy development advocacy to actually get, let me use the current government, to actually act. Because I'm not saying, since currently we want to just maintain the status quo, which is not take us anywhere, what's your advice for those of us in that sector, in the advocacy sector? What can we do? How can we change? How can we at least move the hand of the clock to make sure that it do something? Thank you.
I'm glad you asked that question. Some of us in the advocacy space. Dr. Joe, good to see you again. I have 2 questions. The first question is that, is the current state of the public service, is there a direct correlation between that and our current constitution? That's my first question. And number 2, considering that 2020 is around the corner, if you're a president and you have 5 things to do, the first 5 things is to reform the civil service or public service, what should you actually do?
The first 5 what?
The first 5 things you would do
to
reform the civil or public service. Those are my 2 questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Uzo. My question is basically about the positioning of the nuclear arm. We've heard of it. I would like to know, in terms of coordinating public service reform in Nigeria, do you think that the DPSR, within its position within the current bureaucracy, is able to allow it the access requires, to be able to push the sort of critical, comprehensive reforms that we need to get going. Talked about access to the president. Was that just by your making, or you think that the institution as it is allows that access? Thank you.
Let's come to this.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Joe. I really enjoyed that. I just wanted to ask a few questions. One is, would you say we know what's required? So I think it's similar to what the gentleman over there said. There's so many things that have gone on. Would you say we know already what's required? And then you said that what is political will? I kind of like your definition because it goes beyond the top person to a critical mass of people believing in the same thing, and I like that very much. But I also have noticed that in Nigeria, authority works. So, and the example that one of the learnings that we've had over the last few years is around, for example, the Presidential Ease of Doing Business Council. It has managed to deliver some level of reform, but that's because it's been working on an extra-ministerial platform, really, with the authority of the Office of the Vice President. So while we're looking for this critical mass of people in government, we also know that authority works. So it seems to me there's an ingredient there somewhere that we need. But then we also know that change is not painless, and lasting change requires buy-in from the people. So with all these things in mind, what would you prescribe regarding the how do we reverse this trend? I note that you say that we're 20 years from an abyss, but I look at 20 years down the line. I see a very big picture if we carry on in this way. Starting with simple things like our education system. The description that you gave is just so apt, and I think if nothing is done to change that, reverse that trend, for example, in education, then in 20 years' time, these people that are not competent will take over as our leaders, and we're just going to be more worse trouble than we are already. So what would you prescribe as the how? How do we reverse this trend? Yeah, that's it.
We've heard so much about reforms. Public service, local governments, all about reforms. My question is, don't you think we lack the appropriate pressure group that can push for reforms?
So, role of civil service,
civil society.
Civil society.
Good afternoon. My name is Nasser. Dr. Joe, I would like you to speak to or validate or sort of just disagree with the school of thought that in highly competitive settings where there's a strong principal-agent relationship, that political will can sort of begin from the bottom up. Perhaps one example would be the example of the EFCC during the Obasanjo administration, where the political will for setting up the EFCC came from the presidency, from President Obasanjo. But for whatever it was worth, the chief executive there was sort of able to, even under the pretense of isomorphic mimicry, he was able to, do one or two of the bad things that the presumably presidency wanted him to do. But he was definitely able to also bring around some reforms in that sort of area. Thank you.
And maybe one question online. We've got Chinedu and Narado
how do we entrench monitoring and evaluation metrics into public sector work? How do we also change the psychography of the average Nigerian public servant? The rationale for this is that we seem to run a system that is out to make life difficult for citizens and consumers of government services.
Okay. Let me first start by saying that I'm now a consultant. I'm no longer a public servant. So most of the questions that start with how, you're going to have to pay me if you want the answers. I haven't spent 32 years of my life on this stuff to give it away for free everywhere I go. Okay. So, but do we need a new set of reforms? I think, you know, Titi's answer and what the gentleman said is fairly right. We know roughly what needs to be done, right? But of course, things are dynamic, and so you can't take recommendations that are also made in 2011 and implement them blindly in 2019. It doesn't make sense. So, but in terms of principle, we know roughly what needs to be done. Whether we can then do it is another matter. But you know, even what we felt needed to be done in 2011, there are now new ways and better ways and faster ways and cheaper ways to do it because the world continues to evolve. You know, so some of the recommendations may no longer be appropriate. There have been a number of questions about what can we advocate for, what is the role of civil society, how do we get the citizens to buy into this. And if I'm not mistaken, my former boss, Tony Blair, was the first prominent politician to have campaigned on a mandate of public service reforms and won, and kept winning. And my view, if God forbid I were ever to run for office, God forbid. I am certain that Nigerians will react very favorably to, look, I'm going to stop the nonsense in passports. I'm going to stop people are going to get into universities in a proper way and they're going to get a degree with merit. I'm going to enforce a regime of merit. I'm going to open up the whole of the opacity of the NNPC. I'm going to do. There are a number of things that you will say that would resonate with people. Yeah, no, you won't win now because now we want roads. We don't want anything else. It's only roads. But in 20 years' time, when we are at the abyss, then we will realize that all of these things we're doing have not led us anywhere, and that nothing has changed. So, so I think it's important to continue to make it an issue. You know, it's important to continue to make it an issue in the expectation that one day somebody will be bright enough to take the initiative. The other possibility is that we hope and pray for a happy accident. So we voted someone in hoping that he'll come and do roads, and then he now came and started doing real things. That's a possibility, and that's what advocacy helps with, because of course, to get in this kind of environment, you need to dine with the devil first and tell them what they want to hear. Maybe when you then get there, you can then start to do things that...
But isn't that what, not to mention, I don't know how to say this without mentioning names, but isn't that what Fayemi tried to do in Ekiti, and after 4 years he got paid with a defeat at the polls? Doesn't that say that the people might not be ready for?
Yes, and you know, if you run faster than the people you lead, they will crucify you. Jesus Christ is a good example.
Yeah, true.
So if you run too far ahead of the people you are leading, you get crucified. So that's why you cannot be fanatical about reforms. There's always a sense of balance. There are always things that you tolerate for a while because the timing is not yet right. There are things that you know is the right thing to do, but you simply wait and wait and wait until the right opportunity comes and then you do it. That's how to do reforms. You can't just be militant about it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. Is there a correlation between our constitution and our public service? Well, there's a correlation between our constitution and every problem we have. It's not just our public service. You know, the whole ethos of representation being more important than merit. The whole ethos of sharing being more important than production. All of those things are founded in our constitution. But I actually think that if I want to be fair to the public service, particularly the civil service, I think the civil service has actually survived more damage than the constitution could have done to it. That's my personal view. I think the constitution could have even done more damage if the civil servants had let it. So because there's something you need to understand about a civil servant, right? A civil servant respects rules more than laws. So if the rule is, if the law is, if you don't pay your TV license, you go to jail, or you don't pay your tax, you go to jail. Everybody ignores that. If the civil service rule is, if you move this water from here to here, you get a query, nobody will move it. So within the civil service itself, through an administration of a system of rules, he has managed to even have a semblance of decorum, which may not ordinarily have been there if everybody focuses on laws like the Constitution. What are the first 5 things I'll do to reform the service? I think the first thing I'll do would be to have a dialogue. I remember working in the UK very many years ago, where the organization in which I was working, our chief executive basically called everybody, it was like 10,000 of us, into Wembley Stadium and said, from today, we're going to become a different organization. If you don't want, there's somebody with your check at the door, collect it and go. So there's a need to have a conversation that says, look, we're going to change the dynamics. And yes, we know there are issues, yes, we know there are problems, but we're going to change it. That's the first thing I'm going to do. The second thing I'm going to do
in this conversation, who will lead it?
When South Africa got rid of apartheid and was trying to restructure its economy, it got, I think there were 10 people. The most brilliant professors from the US, Harvard, Yale, 10 of them, locked them in a room for 1 year and said, tell us what we need to do. So I may not even pretend that I have all the answers, but I'll get the best thinkers in the world, working with people here to actually devise solutions that work. And that's what they confirm. Then I'll relentlessly implement what they've suggested. Then I'll create tiers of organizations. So I'll have certain prime ministries and certain prime agencies. Okay, so if it's Border Communities Development Agency, I'll give it to the politician. Choose whoever you like for that one. But if it is NAFDAC, Nigerian Communications Commission, there are a few like that. I am more inclined to advertise the position. Internationally, I can limit it to Nigerians, but I'll advertise it internationally. Everybody from anywhere
Who is a Nigerian?
who is a Nigerian will come and go through a process and lead this premium. They don't need to be many. Like I said, under the Obasanjo regime, it was only basically 6 people that ran the government. Okay, so I will have certain, premium agencies and premium ministries that will be led purely by merit. You cannot do everything by merit. In this kind of our society, you can't. Not now. So I will have certain key ones that will be driven by merit. I will give them the autonomy to recruit who they want. I'll enable them to be paid differently based on recruitment. I would have 6 elite universities, 1 in each geopolitical zone, which would charge almost the same fees as private universities, but will produce quality. And I will give indigent students, indigent or bright students, a grant. We can no longer have uniformity or mediocrity. It makes no sense. So those are the sorts of things I will do. So you can't say, oh, I'm going to do merit all the way through. You will fail. You can't say, oh, I'm going to have the top universities in Ibadan, Lagos, or whatever. It will not happen. You need to go to, you need to at least have 1 in each geopolitical zone and try and get the best out of. So you have a process of producing a different set of people who can come into a different pay rate in a public service that looks different. And perhaps over a period of time, you start to develop 5, 10, 15, 20,000 people that will, over time, start to gradually reshape the civil service, the public service you have.
BPSR.
Position of BPSR, I think I said that already. In my view, BPSR needs to be the secretariat of a cabinet minister driving reforms. That's what it needs to be. It needs to be the secretariat of a cabinet minister. You need a minister in charge of reforms. You don't need a ministry of reform. You don't need a ministry of reform. You need a minister responsible for driving reforms, either as their full-time job or as an additional responsibility. And BPSR should be the secretariat to that minister. It's all set out in the way BPSR was established. It was to take the best of the public service from academia, from the mainline public service itself, and add to it consultants. It's all there. It's just that it's never been activated. In Nigeria, authority works. Yes, it does. Of course, it is a necessary ingredient. However, it is a necessary but insufficient condition. And so, with all due respect, with all of the efforts that are being made on the presidential of doing business, Nigerians can still not get a passport without paying a bribe. There are still touts in the airports. The seaports is still difficult. So it's become better than before, but it's this same thing of, okay, they are using power from the top to tell us, so we will comply. But the real heart of the people implementing it has not necessarily changed. So it's important work, but it needs to go deeper than it does, and it needs to go. It's a bit like Servicom, which Maureen talked about. Somebody woke up one day and decided, what Servicom needs is power. And so somebody went to the Federal Executive Council and said, the Servicom officer must now report to the minister. Direct. So the PEMSEC thought, okay, go now. Go and report to the minister now. Make sure that he got no money to do any work. Because of course the PEMSEC is the accounting officer. So got no money to do any work. Some minister himself is too busy to do anything. And so, And so this whole notion that all you need is power just doesn't work. It doesn't work. And that's why in BPSR we try to drive reforms that people volunteered to do by themselves. We didn't even have the power to force anyone anyway. We're not even set up by law, so can't even force anybody to do anything. Do we lack the appropriate pressure group? The answer is yes. We're not asking enough questions. We're not putting enough pressure on people from an outcome perspective. So we're still saying, this person built this and built that and dug so many boreholes, but do we have more water? We're not asking those questions. Are our students better educated now? Are we more healthy as a people as a result of all of these things you're doing? We're not yet asking those kinds of questions, and I think we need to do a lot more about that. And this is something I actually say that many people don't realize, that demanding reform actually requires a reorientation. You need to know how to even ask. Many people don't. We just assume that we all can, but you need to know what to ask for and how to ask. Political will can begin from the bottom up. Absolutely, yes. If the people say this is what we want, then eventually the politicians will listen. At least now they are buying our votes. Before they didn't bother, they just stayed in hotels and wrote the results. So now at least they are buying our votes. So at least it means our votes are beginning to count. So if the next phase of selling our vote for 1,000 or 2,000 naira is to say, okay, I'm not selling my vote for 2,000 naira. What I want is a functional school. And people start to make that kind of demand, and we will start to see a bit of a difference. Political will setting up, let me do just before the end. Political will setting up the EFCC. That's not actually how it happened. And Patrick raised a very important issue of the one of incentives. The one that President Obasanjo set up is ICPC. He drafted the law in his own hand. That was the very first law that was put before the National Assembly in 1999, and he wrote it in his own hand. Okay, and then how to negotiate, the legislator said, no, now 7 years is too much punishment for corruption. Reduce it. And initially, it was 10 years. Actually, reduce it. So there was that. So and then, as at 2004, when the EFCC was set up, I think ICPC had only convicted one person, one lowly local government chairman somewhere, who fired money from one head to the other. That's the only conviction that ICPC had at the time. What then happened was that Nigeria wanted debt relief. So Nigeria wanted debt relief from donors, but had been on the blacklist of countries that are not transparent with financial flows. Yeah. And so for us to get the debt relief, we needed to get off from that list of non-compliant territories, non-compliant countries and territories, right? So we had to get away from that. And don't forget that at about that same time, 9/11 had happened, and people had drawn a link between corruption and terrorist financing. And so there was an imperative from outside Nigeria to set up an EFCC type operation. And that's it. So it is not out of the benevolence of anybody's hearts. It's because we had to do it in order to get debt relief and because of pressure from abroad for issues of terrorist financing. So here is another important issue, like I said, that you raised, Patrick, the one of incentives. So can we find areas in which the incentives sufficiently align for us to push? Because that's what will get us quicker results than if we go through the normal process. Entrenching M&E into the service, again, is very important, and I'm pleased that a number of civil society organizations are beginning to do good work in this area, beginning to track projects, beginning to track expenditure and payments, but we need to do a lot more than that. It's not only about tracking budgets and tracking procurements. There's a lot more. There's a lot more to do in that space. So I think this more holistic approach to monitoring and evaluation is what is needed, and that comes with education of our civil society members and also ourselves. I think that's what is required. Did I miss out anyone? Okay, so yeah, that was the one. The other one was about entrenching M&E into the public service, and then changing. How do we change mindsets? So we basically change mindsets by learning how to demand improvements in the way things are done. So I remember when I first ran a DFID program a few years ago, a long time ago. We actually did a program one day where we would encourage Nigerians not to give anybody anything on one particular day of the year. So I think we called it a no-pay day or something. So we refused to. Of course, a lot of people ignored it, and a number of people laughed at us as well. But it's the kind of thing where we need to start to identify where areas might exist for us to place pressure on government to do something different.
Excellent. Please, a round of applause for he shared quite a number of perspectives on political will, which I'm sure kind of eliminates the issue for us. Next steps would be that we'll document everything that's been shared here tonight, and we'll share it with you if we have your email address, and also put it in front of people who should be thinking about this stuff in government. In a little bit, I'll invite my colleague Ndo to give a vote of thanks, but permit me to announce our next development discourse, which is going to happen exactly a week from today, actually. And the theme is Theaters of War, Democracy and Collective Violence in Nigeria. And the key speaker is Professor Peter Lewis of Johns Hopkins University. And the session will be moderated by Dr. Oke Ikechukwu MNI. Same time, exactly a week from today. I can't remember the date, but I know it's 23rd. So, yeah, 23rd. So on that note, Wednesday.
Yeah, Thursday.
Wednesday
is 22nd. 22nd.
Okay, so it's okay. All right. So you're right.
Can we please raise applause for Dr. Jula? And then for Patrick for moderating the session. And then for Samuel Long for trying to join us. Just like Patrick said, I expect to see all of you here on the 23rd. And we've even lined up series of other ones for June. I won't be revealing that. I won't say that because maybe people will start booking in advance. So thank you all for coming, and like we all said, let's keep contributing to this national development. We believe in Nigeria, and there's no other home than this place. So like Joe said, after 15 years, he ran back here. He knows Nigeria is still home. So let's continue to engage, let's continue to interrogate. We are getting there. One day Nigeria will be like any other Western nation. Thank you for coming.